did get some videos, not very many. I got some sounds. I don't know if we're fast enough, but I've tried it. Oh no, we're not doing that in Windows. Yes, a sound of a butcher called Douglas, which is kind of weird. And things as well. So I then ended up with weirdly, someone pointed out that I could get hold of this genuine 18th century tobacco jar on an online auction, which supposedly said Oldton on it, O-L-D-T-O-N, just in here. So I bid for it, I won it and got it through the post. So I ended up getting a sort of real Oldton object out of a fictional device in which to keep my dad's ashes or something. It's quite a spooky thing, which I sort of slightly haunted invested by narrative. And it made me think it's quite an interesting relationship between writing about stuff online and then getting it through the post as an object, that you've invested it with story from a virtual space. It becomes quite talismanic. By the way, if you go on eBay, you can actually find a whole buyer's guide on warnings about when and how to buy haunted items now. So beware. So that's another writer's role. Now, I suppose the other puzzle with something like getting this stuff, I've ended up with about 100, probably about 150 people all sending in bits of stuff, some of them more active than others. And they're sometimes bringing their own stuff, and sometimes, as you'll see from that sidebar, commenting on each other's and then adding another narrative riff. So my problem was what to do with all that. How to get it in some kind of order. My obvious thing to do to start with was I felt like drawing and not writing. And that's one of the other things I've found with digital writing of all sorts, is you start with the traditional idea of writing, either sitting down typing, but quite often, depending on the software you use or the tools you use, you end up doing something else. So it's like you don't sit down and write poetry with Excel, do you? And if you did, what would it look like? So, you don't try and write with Photoshop, but you write with a word processor. But sometimes it's quite good to swap the tools out and see what happens. And if you start taking up a new piece of software, does it change the way you write? Well, yeah, hell it does, definitely. And it's something to be really aware of when you're going to digital space of any sort. If you go from paper and pen to a word processor, you are going to change the way you write quite big time. Most people use really horrible fonts quite soon, don't they? And pink text and things like this they wouldn't dream of playing with otherwise. But so I drew, and I took all the things that people had said to me and then tried to draw out on a big piece of paper what the town might look like based on everybody's descriptions. And it kind of worked. That I could take a square and say that, here's a picture of my home, that picture, and then somebody else had sent in a picture of the church, and so you could see the church from my house. So the graveyard was quite nearby, and I could keep walking around this. There's the church, and the graveyard's that way. But I annotated it like a walking tour, but using every red link you see there's a link back into the blog to the individual contribution from somebody else. So when I click graveyard, I should get a picture of the graveyard, but that's been submitted by a complete stranger over the internet. So I'm getting a kind of photorealistic guide to an imaginary town based on everybody's contributions as I go round. So the Oldton church, there it is. But there was one, some people thought there was a clock on the tower. Oh, well, that's a bad link. There you go. And the bell ringing sequence. I think that's a link to gravestones and church bells. And then you can actually go and see the ring bell. That's the actual peal list for Felsted based on Oldton St Michael's Church. So we actually know how the church bells sound in Oldton if we keep drilling down through this guide. Okay, so that was pretty good in itself. I felt that I've created a sort of quite a detailed landscape out of everybody's contributions and sort of rebuilt my childhood landscape. But it didn't help me the other half of it, which was to discuss my dad, really. and this is the bit where you sort of think, well, this is now I want to write my story. How do I do that? Well, the other thing I'd noticed was that I'd done the grid, maybe not quite accidentally, but it's 4 by 13. I think I was thinking about time and 4 quarters, as it were, or 4 seasons. But I realised it was 52, and that's a pack of cards. So I thought, maybe this is to introduce a kind of game element to this, which people do with storytelling online quite often. Could I turn this story into a pack of cards? So if I turn the map over, I then, on the back of it is a pack of cards, made out of all the text and images that people had submitted into the space. And then with that, rather like a Johnny Cash song, I could then tell the story of my dad through going through a pack of cards. So I've annotated that, and then every link in that is a link to another card. So you can start shuffling through this pack in various different ways. It takes you out through the site to different stuff. You can sort of start anywhere, which is quite an important part of interactivity. Start anywhere. You can shuffle. You can twist them over and go back to the map. Twist it back to go back to the card. And obviously you can go higher or lower as you rattle around this narrative. So that's just playing around with both some traditions about hypertext literature, which some of you will be aware of, I'm sure, and also something about game playing, of the significance of cards as predicting the future, telling your fortune, or that you as a family play them round a table and talk about each other, and as we used to do, and you use them as sort of tokens, but they're also used for storytelling. So in there is, I think there's some quotes from the Bible, a quote from an Edward Thomas poem, and a picture of an apple core that someone took in Dundee Airport in about 2004 that they sent me. So it's a sort of strange merging of sources into that thing. And that is, I have updated the map when new stuff comes in, but that's the basics of how it works, apart from 2 things that have happened since have been great. One is, I thought it seems silly not to make the actual packs of cards, so that people who contributed to the site get a free pack. So they get that feeling that they do something online and then something comes through the post that you can hold in your hand. And for me it was quite sentimental, because in fact I was saying that I didn't really have a physical connection between the stuff of my parents and the stuff of my children. I was thinking, well, I do now. I've got something to hold in my hand. And it is a book, it's just not bound. So a physical object is always, I think, to come out of it is quite interesting. And so that's a collaborative work of fiction. People actually read those in bed, weirdly. And the second thing that we made out of it was one of the people who got interested in this was a radio producer, and she said, I think this would make a radio play. I'd never done anything like that before, so I said, yeah, all right then. And so I scripted a story which was the story of me and my dad going through this imaginary landscape to the point of his death, as described by the other people who'd been online. And we rang them up and got them to speak their stuff down the phone at us, and then stitch it together with 2 actors telling the story of me and my dad. And it's a 45-minute afternoon play, and I'm happy to say it was so nominated, got quite a big audience, and a lot of traffic subsequently to the Radio 4 site for people trying to participate further in the project. So again, as we were saying earlier, there is a lot of appetite for this out there, that once people see there are opportunities, and relatively simple opportunities for participation and engagement, they take it. People do take it, and they come from all backgrounds.